Why was my family kicked off the Choctaw tribal roll in 1907? So the Goins family, in particular Evelyn, found herself embroiled in a convoluted legal case that resulted in the family's disenrollment from the Choctaw Nation. Indian blood, no matter how well it's authenticated, doesn't really entitle one, though, to tribal citizenship. And I think this is kind of the issue that my family faced. What I want to tell you about is the story of Frances Padilla. I have been looking for her for years, and I'm still not 100% sure that I found her. She opens up a wider exploration into the history of the Choctaw Nation. On record, we find her as a 2-year-old on the 1860 census, presumably the daughter of Antonio, and it's written as Padilla or Padier, but other census records confirm that his last name was Padilla. And her mom was Evelyn Goins. 1907 was a time of a lot of change happening in Indian Territory. And that's exactly where this family was residing at the time. Now, I'm not personally interested right now in tribal enrollment for a lot of reasons, in part because I have no cultural connection to that at all. I'm not even 100% sure that this is my family line. But one of the reasons that we wouldn't have cultural connection is because of the story I'm about to share with you right now. Why was my family kicked off the Choctaw tribal roll in 1907? Well, I didn't even know that they were on the tribal roll until this year. But first, we have to talk about the state of Oklahoma. And this is a really important inflection point for Native Americans, especially the Choctaw Nation, because before statehood, this was considered Indian territory. It was precisely that. It was the expanse where numerous tribes lived, including the Choctaw, and federal acts and treaties over time began to just carve away at this territory. Now remember, this was territory that is given to these people because they were pushed off their original homeland. There were waves of white settlers moving into what was supposed to be Indian territory. This was supposed to be reserved land, hence reservation, but it wasn't in reality. So the Oklahoma Territory came into existence through the Oklahoma Organic Act. And that's just, the Organic Act is just a generic name for a statute used by the United States Congress to describe a territory in anticipation of it being admitted into the United States. New boundary lines are being drawn for everybody. But the distinction between Oklahoma territory and Indian territory, these lines soon blurred. They weren't separate like they were supposed to be. And it ended up being a single unified state in 1907 that we now call Oklahoma. But that's setting the stage for what is happening with what I found. So the transformation from Indian territory to the state of Oklahoma led to a major restructuring of tribal roles. Now, these roles were the official documentation of membership within these nations, and I'm talking in particular right now about the Choctaw Nation. These weren't just lists, but they were like the keys to cultural heritage, legal benefits, and communal identity. On these cards, they also listed the blood quantum of those who were enrolled, which indicated, to the best of their ability, because there were no DNA tests, a person's degree of Native ancestry. It was usually measured as a fraction. And that was basically the proof to solidify any dispute against their heritage or where they belonged. So what this means is that individuals who had once been recognized as Choctaw could potentially find themselves disenrolled based on new federal criteria. But why? They were living in Indian territory in the late 1880s. They were listed on the Indian census as Native American, as Choctaw. She was there with her sons. What's interesting, though, is that when they were disenrolled, there's a bunch of affidavits, like these legal documents that Evelyn Goins left behind because she had to swear to her heritage in court. And I want to tell you a little bit about her before I tell you why she was kicked off the Choctaw rolls. So Sharpeen Evelyn Goins was born in St. Landry Parish, Louisiana in 1821. When I was researching her, I found something that was posted by a distant family member, and it was called Philip Goins, Choctaw, How He Evaded the Reservation. Her grandfather, Philip Goins, is living in Louisiana until 1834 when they emigrated to Coahuila y Tejas, which is what is now Mexico, but they became citizens of Spain. The family originally started in what is now Mississippi. I don't know if during the Trail of Tears or what happened, why they ended up out of Mississippi, but then eventually she marries Antonio Padilla, and they are living in Texas together. But then she ends up back up on Indian territory later on. And on September 9th, 1896, evidence was introduced in the United States Citizenship Court in Indian Territory that the names of the Goins family appeared on the 1874 census rolls of Indian Territory to say, like, hey, they've been here for a really long time. And an application was made for the enrollment of them as Choctaws by blood of the Goins family. And it was filed with the Dawes Commission with evidence, numerous affidavits, all kinds of records to say, yes, we are Choctaw. We shouldn't have been kicked off the rolls. Here's all of our proof. A man named David Reynolds, who was 70 years old at the time, he was a resident of Atascosa County, which is where the Goins had been living, gave an affidavit to the Dawes Commission during this court case where there is this push to disenroll the Goins family from the Choctaw Nation. And he said, quote, I was present when he, Jeremiah Goins, proved himself by white men and Indians that he was a Choctaw Indian at Nacogdoches County in 1848 in the latter part of August. And the record shows that, quote, Jeremiah Goins was a mixed blood Choctaw, possessing somewhere between 1/2 and 7/8 Choctaw blood. Just kind of going through, Jeremiah Goins and his family were members of the Choctaw Nation in Mississippi. The record shows that he was one of the frontiersmen who alternated between Choctaw Nation and Texas, and he was acknowledged by those who knew him to be a Choctaw Indian, and he acted as an interpreter in proceedings in which Choctaws appeared. So Jeremiah Goins acted as an interpreter because he knew the Choctaw language, and he was kind of interfacing for people. Then the Dawes Commission on December 1st, 1896, denied the request of the applicant, stating that, quote, a Choctaw Indian to be entitled to enrollment should have at some time prior to the Act of 1898 established a residence in the Choctaw Nation. There was an appeal for the family members to be put on the Choctaw tribal rolls, and attorneys provided over 50 pages of typewritten material that proved their blood quantum, their residence, and their tribal affiliation, and they were successful. So then all the Goins get put back on the tribal rolls. So they're kicked off, then they're put back on, but the story is not over. The Dawes Commission are allowed to bring this court case back up and overturn the citizenship that had been conferred. And a question that a lot of people have asked when they researched this case is, if Jeremiah Goins was 1/2 or 7/8 Choctaw Indian, why weren't they admitted on the Choctaw Indian rolls? Indian descent, Indian blood, no matter how well it's authenticated, doesn't really entitle one, though, to tribal citizenship. And I think this is kind of the issue that my family faced. During the enrollment period, when all this stuff was going on, many applications were presented by people who claimed to have Indian blood and others who had lived outside of the nation and had never been officially recognized as a citizen of the tribe. So having Indian blood itself doesn't confer citizenship to a nation. And the matter was terminated on June 3rd, 1909. So it's really interesting. So I still don't really know what all this means. I thought one thing that was really interesting was that on the original enrollment cards for the Choctaw Nation, my family's blood quantum is listed, and it's like the right amount. So I'm not really sure, and I'm not really sure what happened to the land that they were living on in Chickasaw territory before. So this is just kind of a little sneak peek into what I'm working on, because Frances Padilla, I believe, is Lola's maternal grandmother. And Lola is my great-grandmother, and she's the one who kind of jump-started this whole journey for me of digging into family history and understanding American identity. It's apparent here that the intricacies of American identity and hidden history are tightly interwoven with policies and land being exchanged and the far-reaching consequences of that. And thinking about, my family and the Goins family, that line, they're not just passive recipients of history. They're part of a larger community that's actively being affected by these systemic forces that they really have no control over, right? And they're trying to figure out, there's a fault line here, there's an earthquake coming, and you're trying to figure out which side of this do we jump to, which side will we be safer. And so, in summary, I think this metamorphosis of Indian Territory to Oklahoma and the way things shook out for the actual people who live there, it's not just a change in name, just underscores just the process of a legal system that can sometimes leave individuals and families kind of without the rubber stamp of approval. We didn't know about this because based on the census records that I found, I think Lola's grandmother likely died during childbirth or died very young. And so she didn't exist as a figure in Lola's life or her mom's life. And so this side of the family, the history has just been kind of, it's gone. Digging in and working on my own family history. And if you'd like to work on your family history, I'll leave a link below for the masterclass that I created called Be a Good Ancestor, and we'll talk soon.